Lynn, can you go into the trustees and get the rest of our guys?
They might be in the hallway.
Well, they're coming.
There's more people coming in on that side.
There's 1 second.
Yeah, Lynn, open the door. You gotta press the button.
Press the button.
Lynn, press the button on the wall.
Down, 3 times.
Locked down.
Like this into the guy. There's a rail, it still doesn't.
Everyone ready? Okay.
Is Joe coming?
He's here.
Oh.
Yeah, he's coming.
Is that Big Phil?
Thank you for your patience. We ready? Good morning. My name is Ansbro. I'm the president of the Uniformed Firefighters Association of Greater New York. The UFA represents 20,000 active and retired New York City firefighters. I'm joined today with Jimmy Brosi of the UFOA, the Uniformed Fire Officers Association of Greater New York, that represents 7,000 active and retired New York City fire officers. We're joined with members of both of our executive boards to discuss the anniversary of September 11th. As we approach the 23rd anniversary of September 11, 2001, the day that the city and nation was attacked by terrorists, an attack which cost the lives of 2,977 innocent lives, 343 of them New York City firefighters. We are saddened to announce that since last September 11th, we have lost 28 more members of the FDNY to toxins that the members were exposed to at Ground Zero, bringing the number of FDNY members lost since September 11, 2001 to 370. This brings the total number of FDNY members that have made the supreme sacrifice since September 11, 2001 and the 23 years that have followed, 713 souls. Today that number is 317, and although we pray that 9/11 has claimed its last victims, we sadly know that this isn't the end. We all know co-workers that are sick. Some of them are nearing the end of their fight. The list of sick FDNY members continues to grow, just as the list of those we have lost continues to grow. Never forget the motto that we continue to repeat. Never forget the 343 firefighters that answered the call that day and never returned home to their families. Never forget the 370 members of the FDNY that have gotten sick in the years that have passed and passed away in the following years. Never forget the sick and the dying that are still paying the price for answering the call that day and in the months that followed. It has been 23 years, and sadly New York City firefighters are still fighting the battles related to that day. Sick and dying New York City firefighters and other first responders and all New Yorkers continue to pay the price for the events of September 11th and the toxins released that day. I'd like to introduce Jimmy Brosi and let him take on from here.
Good morning. I'm Jim Brosi. I'm the President of the Uniform Fire Officers Association. I want to thank you all for coming. When I hear those numbers, they're alarming. Over 130,000 people enrolled in the World Trade Center program. Additional 7 people will be added to the wall next year. That already missed the cutoff for the people who were previously placed on the wall this year at 32. I think that things get lost in numbers is because we're not seeing the people behind those numbers. The numbers are alarming. We're nearly over 23 years away from the event. But the numbers don't paint the picture of how people are suffering, how people have become dependent on quality medical care. And although they're alive in life, they are not necessarily living. And we beg people every year, and 5 different times on trips down to Congress since 2010, we've asked people to support the Zadroga bill for the health funding of the responders and survivors that worked on 9/11 and the days to come thereafter. Our members, the police department, first responders, and all volunteers are glaring examples of what the best of New Yorkers are, and for that matter, the best of all American citizens. Nearly every state in the country is affected by people who are sick from 9/11 exposure, and due to the rising cost of cancer treatment, and due to 69 cancers that are registered as exposures to 9/11, we urge every single one of you and all of your constituents and anyone hearing this message to urge their congressmen, their representatives to get behind the 9/11 responders and survivors Health Funding Correction Act, so that funding does not run out by 2028, so that we don't have to turn people away who sacrifice their health and their time in order to better other New Yorkers and other Americans, and so that we don't have to beg once more, that we can be treated with respect, that people can receive the treatment that they deserve, and despite being ill, have the best quality of life that can be offered to them as they face some of the dire consequences that many of our members have already succumbed to. Thank you for your time.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, this feels like the legislative piece of this feels like it comes up every 2 years. I feel like there was one maybe even 3 years ago where it was like, this is it. It's kind of a 99-year timetable, the money's there, and yet once again you guys are having to ask Congress to fix this again. Why do you think this keeps having to be a patch, and is there a more structured ultimate solution you'd like to see?
Well, it seems like they don't want to overestimate the number of people that continue to come into the program, but they habitually seem to have underestimated it. So the amount of money they've needed has continued to grow over time, but they feel with this last package that they'll be able to be fully funded after this amount coming in based on their projections. They could be wrong, but they believe this will be the final fix. And every time they go to Washington to get a funding bill, it never gets fully funded. It's always a piece, and they leave a piece on the table. This is to close everything up and have it fully funded.
What sort of impact does it have on those that are sick and dying, that you know better than all of us in this room, that there's this uncertainty? Is that a piece that weighs on your members who are dealing with these dire circumstances?
Fortunately, I don't believe anyone's been denied any services, and for those people that are facing cancers that are taking their lives, I know both of us went through losing our fathers in the last couple of years, and my father and his father were members of the program, and it was, it's good to know that the health care is taken care of and you're not going to suffer, but for people, for those of us that aren't sick yet, we have to wonder if it is going to be there for if and when we get sick. But right now, I wouldn't say it affect anyone that's currently on the job. They wouldn't feel that. We make sure they're taken care of.
You just talked about this last fix legislatively. What is standing between you and getting over that hurdle right now?
Well, right now the bill's being introduced, and it's been introduced, and we're just trying to get the votes together to get it passed. Usually they'll put this in a larger package, and it'll pass all at once, so we're just going through the legislative process to get this out there, and we're just putting it on the table that this is something that we expect legislators to pay attention to and not let fall by the wayside in this very hectic election season.
Any resistance, though, and what's your argument to those who may not be convinced that this needs to happen?
The same argument is why doesn't New York pick up all of the cost? Do we really know that's how much we're going to need? And every projection we've ever had has always been an underestimation when it plays out how many people are actually sick. No one would have imagined it was 130,000, but I think they believe 23 years into it, they've captured a very large portion of it. The numbers will always go up, but I believe they feel this funding will get ahead of that.
Jim just talked about, the numbers don't paint the picture fully of people who are alive but not necessarily living. Could you sort of elaborate on that? Give us sort of what it's like to live in this circumstance for the folks who may not know someone who's going through this.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you see the side effects of these ailments, we just had a member pass away who had lost his voice probably over the last 2 or 3 years of his life because of thyroid cancer, and esophageal cancer had invaded his voice box. We have several members with a very similar condition because thyroid cancer is so prolific as one of the side effects. And those members are actually having difficulty swallowing, having difficulty projecting their voice, and it is compromising their living. Just had a member just have a permanent colostomy bag placed on him for the remainder of his life under the age of 50. So these are significant ailments people are suffering, and they're not visible in the data. They're visible in the humans, and we have a more personal touch because we're helping shepherd them through the process, and we are grateful for what is available to them. I think there is a little bit more trepidation in the people who have long-term illnesses that require very expensive treatment, that if this is not refunded, that they may run through the limits of their own health care, or they may run through the limits of their own personal expenses in order to maintain some quality of life. Unfortunately, our members seem to be afflicted with most significant cancers, and we're seeing them play out right before our eyes. And it's alarming to the membership who haven't been affected yet, because some of them fear that's what's coming for them. It just hasn't presented itself yet.
Jim, kind of expanding on that, we're 23 years in. We went through that first wave of maybe more senior officers. Can you talk a little bit more about who we're dealing with now? I imagine 23 years ago, these were new members of the department, probies, that sort of person.
I would say, like anything else, I think we're down to about 1,000 members still remaining on the department. But since the program extends to retirees, we're also dealing with them as well. So we're in that age group of who would have come on the job in their 20s, and now we're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so, unfortunately, they are being afflicted with cancers at a much younger age. And I would say that the only thing that's giving them hope is access to quality treatment. I think the scanning and monitoring of the World Trade Center, along with the fire department, has definitely aided us in early detection. And that early detection has certainly given us better outcome, which is why you're seeing some real longevity in some real dire cancers. And so that part is good. The problem is, just because you're alive, it doesn't mean you're living. And these people are suffering every day just trying to stay alive between scans, the uncertainty of those outcomes, the transition from treatment to treatment until effectiveness is no longer possible. And so that's the part you can't see in the numbers. You can see it in the deaths, you can see it in the age bracket, but you can't see that someone suffered with terminal cancer for 3, 5, 10 years. Our last diagnosis of terminal cancer, who was our last person we buried on Saturday, was diagnosed less than a year ago. Less than a year ago, he was full duty riding on a fire truck, and within a 12-month period, he was buried. Young person, early 50s, active, healthy, vibrant person, and a contributor to the New York City Fire Department, and in less than 12 months, taken. That's the part you won't see in a statistic.
Can you discuss discuss the extent of the exposure? You know, we often think of those 343, but there were so many more that rushed in to go through the pile and also participate in the cleanup.
To describe the extent of the exposure is almost an impossibility. Not just being south of Canal Street, being in contaminated rigs, taking contaminated gear back to the firehouse, riding on a city bus back to Shea Stadium, filled with what I would say is floating asbestos as it danced through the bus on the way back until we could be discharged back into our own personal vehicles, and then took that gear home only to return back to the site. It was a long time before any type of decon facility appeared, before any part of the site had been gained control of to the point where we could organize who was responding, how long they would operate for, what their level of exposure was, before we provided any respiratory protection, and to some degree while we were still being told that the air at Ground Zero was still safe. And so, unfortunately, the exposure was chronic and not just isolated to the site. It was every place we took that cross-contamination with us in an effort to constantly return to the scene to find any remaining victim possible.
The landfill as well.
Exactly.
And have there been new cancers added?
They just added uterine cancer is the most recent cancer. That was the 69th cancer added to the program.
And is there a primary cancer that doctors are seeing more of?
That I'm unsure.
We've had obviously a lot of lung cancer. We've had a lot of some brain tumors. There's usually a lot of throat cancer, digestive tract cancer, things like that. Areas where the exposure would have got in is where we're seeing it. Yeah, and also usually by the time someone passes, they end up with multiple cancers. I know my father's particular case, it started in one area, and by the time he had passed, it had been in his bones and in his organs. So usually these are very aggressive cancers. He mentioned, the last person that passed, it was 1 year from which he was diagnosed when he passed. There are cases of members that ran the marathon in November, and Tommy Phelan ran the marathon, felt sick in December, got tested January 2nd because he didn't want to take off on New Year's Eve, make someone else work, and he passed away on March 16th, and he was in his mid-40s. So the cancers that we get when they affect us, they're aggressive.
That was this past year?
This was 6 years ago, Tommy Phelan. He went 4 months from running a sub-4-hour marathon to dying of lung cancer.
And how does the union assist these members?
Well, right, as you see, we're fighting for the health care for these members, but the union can only do so much. Usually it's the firehouses that pick up the slack and see to it that the family's cared for. The Fire Family Transport does a phenomenal job getting getting family members to visit the members in the hospital, take that burden off them of where they park. The FDNY also has Family Assistance Unit, which does a tremendous job. The union's role in this is usually relegated to trying to get things passed to aid financially, but the FDNY is a tremendous family, and everyone helps out when we know one of our members is sick and dying.
Has the problem with the funding been that there was never enough to begin with, or that as more firefighters get sick, the cost of the healthcare balloons, or both?
Well, the cost of the healthcare continually goes up based on the number of people in the program. It's not just the FDNY. It's everyone that was below Canal Street in the year after 9/11. Right now, there's over 130,000 people in the World Trade Center healthcare program. There's going to reach a point in time where it levels off, but they haven't gotten there yet.
The original bills hadn't necessarily been passed with inflationary costs, plus with the dramatic improvement in cancer research. Every time a new drug comes out, it is usually, much more costly than the drugs that exist currently in the market. So with every advancement, along with every additional cancer that gets added to the program, it was just an exponential cost the original bills couldn't account for.
Are you expecting this latest bill will take in even more inflation in terms of the numbers that are seeking healthcare assistance and the cost?
Senator Gillibrand said that she'd hoped that this would be the last time we would ever have to ask for funding, and that would carry us to the 2090 expiration date of those members covered by the Health Care Act.
Are you confident this would be the last funding bill?
We hope so.
We hope so.
If this is the last bit of funding, that means that our members have stopped getting sick, and we always hope for that. We hope we never need another dollar, but we know that's not true. We know our members keep getting sick. It's not stopping. Every month we're burying 3 or 4 new FDNY employees that have passed. The numbers just continue to grow. We went to the ceremony last week down at Metro Tech. They have a wall of remembrance for those that have passed from 9/11 illnesses. They added 36 more names to the wall, which brought the total at the time to 363 members as of last Memorial Day. That's why we have separate numbers. But the new wall they put up, the 363 names that were on the wall, weren't even half of the wall. I counted up the blank spaces on that wall, and they're prepared. They have the size of that wall to hold 960 names. And at the rate we're going, someday we'll reach that, we believe. And hopefully the healthcare funding is going to be there to see that those members don't suffer mentally knowing that they can't get their health care and see the doctors they need to see. This is what that's for. Everyone knows the numbers are going to grow. Everyone knows we're going to lose more people. And right now the city, the FDNY has a wall that can hold 960 names.
The risk we run with not having additional funding now, permanent funding, is the further we get away from this tragedy, the less likely people will be sympathetic to the need. It is unrealistic. People are dying off. People who lived during that time. I believe there was an article in the paper not that long ago about people below the age of 30, if they could remember where they were on 9/11. And it was an alarming statistic. I believe less than 40% could remember where they were on 9/11. And the further we get from that, the further we get from the sympathetic group that might recognize what a national tragedy this was, the less likely we'll be able to get funding as we compete with all other newer disasters, all other budgetary crises. And the people who are fighting for this health care are getting older and weaker. And we have shepherded enough sick and elderly people down to DC in 2010, 2015, 2019 in order to make our case. I think the days of going down there with dying members just to make our point has passed. This is a recognizable tragedy, is a recognizable exposure, and it is something that should be addressed permanently so the people that sacrifice their own personal health for others don't have to worry about at least this one thing.
And when you talk about how long it's been since September 11th, something that hasn't happened yet in the fire department is a member getting hired that wasn't even alive that day. Right now they're going through a process of putting out an examination, and the list that's produced will finally have New York City firefighters on it, potential firefighters that weren't even born on 9/11. So sometime in the near future, a firefighter will go into a firehouse and sit across the table from someone that survived it, and he hadn't even been born yet. He or she hadn't been born yet. So time marches on, and for a lot of people, it's in the rearview mirror.
Thank you.
Any more questions? No?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.